Order, order. Well, it's my great pleasure to welcome the Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology, Peter Kyle, and the Permanent Secretary in the Department, Sarah Munby. We really appreciate your coming to see us, and we have a 2-hour session to work together. And I think as our approach, this is the beginning of a relationship between the committee and the department, which we anticipating being constructive and also illuminating. I think science and the value of science is a shared belief across the House and across all the parties represented here. And so I wanted to start, Secretary of State, by asking you, as the relatively new Secretary of State for what is still a relatively new department, if you could set out in a few brief sentences what your ambition is for the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology.
Thank you, Chair. Congratulations on becoming Chair, and congratulations to everybody who's on the committee here. I hear loud and clear the spirit of the words for which you introduced me. I will try to play my part and be as open-hearted and as informative as possible. Having been on a similar committee for a long period of time, know just how much it can contribute when that relationship with the department is a constructive and functional one, and I'll do my best to make that so. In terms of my ambitions for the department and the government's ambitions for the department, the best way to explain it shortly is to express the desire of what we did when we were designing our programme of government. We wanted to create a department building on the achievements of the previous government. We appreciate, and I appreciate, that the creation of DSIT was the right thing to do. We wanted to build on it. We wanted to make it a department which contributes towards economic growth. We wanted it to become a department which played a much more assertive role in supporting government's transition towards digital technology in the way that government transacts itself between government departments and within government departments, so we have a smoother running, a more efficient running of government itself. We also want it to play a role, a much greater role, in transforming the relationship that individual citizens have with their state. And all three of those areas are things that the new DSIT has become. It's my ambition that DSIT can contribute meaningfully to those three areas, and I think through the course of today, it'll become more, there'll be more light shed on how we intend to achieve it. But just to say that all of these areas that I've just mentioned are high growth areas and will have an impact on the future of our country and individuals to succeed and fulfill their potential. Yet there's nothing inevitable about technology achieving any of these things. I believe for every fibre of my being, the government has agency in the way that technology impacts and science and R&D impacts society. And it's my desire to use that agency to make sure that everyone from every background and every part of our country benefits equally from it.
Thank you, Secretary of State, and it is very good to hear your passion and your ambition for the department. And in the interests of declaring all interests, I should say that the Secretary of State and I work together in opposition in some of the development of some of the policies and the ambitions for the department. And so I suppose that naturally leads to the next question, which should be, Secretary of State, how would you assess your first 5 months in post?
Well, I think it's your job to assess my first 5 months in post. I think that what I've tried to do is deliver a set of machinery of government changes, and we're the only department that was allowed to do significant machinery of government changes, and that was because the Prime Minister accepted that to achieve the three things, the three broad ambitions that I set out before, we needed to restructure DSIT. So what we've done is consolidated digital services from the centre of government and across the centre of government into one unit to create the digital centre of government. That's not because I wanted to sort of hoard power and influence and resource, but because in order to match the delivery function with the ambitions that we set out, we had to do things differently. So the first stage of this transition was over the summer to design and for the civil service, and let me pay absolute tribute to Sarah, her team and all officials in DCIT, and including those ones who have joined DCIT from other parts of government, because the alacrity and enthusiasm that they've shown and the experience which they brought to bear has far exceeded even the expectations and hopes that I brought into this post. So we've consolidated digital services from across government, but it's really important to say to the committee that we have separated governance from the delivery aspects of digital. So whereas the powerful digital centre of government, which I believe creates one of the most powerful digital centres and capacities of any government anywhere in the world to be at the disposal of those frontline public services and departments, it is governed by the interministerial group. That is Pat McFadden for the Cabinet Office, it's Darren Jones for the Treasury, and myself that are responsible now for governing digital services from across government, including the digital centre. So that means that there is a governance and a performance management, if you like, a regime which sits above the sort of engine of digital that we've created. And now with 3 action plans that have been underway since the beginning, or 1 action plan, which is the Matt Clifford's AI action plan, and 2 what I would call reform plans, the review into the digital centre itself, how it's structured, and then alongside it, the state of the digital state review, which has done an assessment of the digital capacities of each government department, the first time this has ever been done before. So that is a skills assessment, it is a capacity assessment, and it is a view of what the digital transition could achieve, what the demand and need is within each government department. So we have two reform programmes, reports, and the action plan, all of which are coming into the phase where we can start to consider releasing it to the public, and at which point you'll see the structural reforms coming together with a purpose for each of these new units in the digital centre. And I think from the new year you'll see us pivot very, very dramatically towards delivering within government and services for the public.
Thank you, and there's a lot of interest in the digital centre, and we'll be coming to discuss that in a few minutes' time. I did just want to ask you to say what you would, if you are to appear before us, and I hope you will, in 6 months' time, what should we hold you to account for delivering? And you've indicated some of the things you intend to deliver in the new year. Saying, if we look forward 6 months, what should we be holding you to account for?
I would like to be held to account for the focus that we have for R&D in science towards the national missions of our country, not just the missions that we set out as a government, but the priorities that the country has. We have an outstanding scientific community. The work that UKRI does and all of our funding bodies is exemplary. We need to make sure that we are demonstrably delivering the priorities that the country has, and we were setting these out obviously in a speech made by the Prime Minister later this week, but also with the establishment of a Industrial Strategy Council, which will be setting out some industrial priorities for our country. I want to make sure that our R&D community and the work that we fund plays its part in delivering it. I think you should look very closely at the way that government departments working with DCIT begin the digital transformation within departments and between departments. And I think that your committee will be instrumental in shining light on the progress that we make with that. And then, of course, there is this area of citizen empowerment, which I believe technology can do. I think we had the 97 government, led by Tony Blair, was dramatically improved the governance of our public services by driving governance closer to communities. It's my belief, and it's the Prime Minister's belief, that technology can empower citizens directly as well, by clever and wise and safe use of data, but also the way that digital services can deliver services into the pockets of citizens into the long term. And I hope that the committee will recognise changes and certainly steps in those directions in the coming months.
Thank you. I think you'll see there's a lot of nodding heads around the committee, and there's a lot of agreement on the power of technology, and we certainly look forward to or wish to see it realised. Can I just ask the Permanent Secretary, you spoke about the reorganisation and bringing in different departments, different teams from different departments, the government digital services, for example, into DCIT. When will funding for these bodies be allocated to the department, and have all staff in these bodies moved into DSIT's offices?
So for all practical purposes, staff are already transferred now, so we're operating as one department. Formal payroll transfer always takes a while after a machinery of government change. We expect that to happen in the summer, but that's the final formal step. We'd hope that staff would say at the moment that they feel they're kind of fully operating as members of the DSIT team. The formal budgetary transfer happens at supplementary estimates, but again, for all kind of effective purposes, I'm the accounting officer for that spend now. The vast majority of budgets are already sorted. We know exactly where we are. There are a few last bits to sort of tick and tie, particularly as it relates to managing any costs of transition and splitting funding of that between different departments. But I would say it's really points of detail. At the moment, we're up and functioning as DSIT, including our new teams who've been enormously welcome, and a huge amount of opportunity to go after it, looking not just at those operational matters of bringing the teams together, but actually finding the policy delivery and content connections across topics like data and AI. And we've really started to see that happening over the last few months, which has been fantastic.
Great. Well, we'll be coming back to that as well. Just finally for me, before I hand over to Emily, I would... we talked about sort of the funding that has, I think you said, come with the departments, with the groups from other departments into the DSIT, What trade-offs do you expect? Well, I think I addressed this to the Secretary of State. What trade-offs do you anticipate or expect to make as part of the upcoming spending review?
I don't expect there to be trade-offs. I think the Prime Minister has, we're not a mission lead. There are 5 missions for this government. The DSIT isn't the lead for one of them. But we are, to use the phrase that the Prime Minister's used, the foundations upon which all of the missions sit. It's not going to be possible for us to meet any of the missions that the government has set out without clever use of the areas for which DSIT is responsible. And from that regard, I think you'll see that from the first spending review, where it was a source of frustration for me, if I speak candidly, that whilst I and my team and Sarah and her teams were negotiating and in discussions with the Treasury earnestly, with full discretion, as you'd expect at a moment like this, to see rumours flying around in the media, which unfortunately were being sort of finding foothold amongst the scientific community, who normally rest their professions on peer review evidence-based research, believing every rumour out there that I was going to take a scalpel to the R&D budget, and we came back with an 8.5% uplift. So you'll see that actually this is a government from the Treasury to the 10 Downing Street, and of course right through DSIT, that recognises the value of R&D, innovation, the scientific community, life sciences, and of course the technology sectors. These are all high-growth sectors. They are all absolutely important to get our country, rooted into the high-growth sectors of the future and to create the great jobs that our citizens really, really need and deserve. So, I don't see trade-offs, but what I do see is greater cooperation between DSIT and frontline public services and government departments across the board.
Thank you, and that certainly that endorsement for investment in DSIT is welcome, and the challenge of working across government, as you set out, is something I think we'll be returning to. But I'm now going to hand over, not to Emily, but in fact to George, who's very interested in, as becomes his previous role. He's very interested, particularly interested in that relationship with growth, which is so important to the missions and to our future prosperity.
Thanks, Chair. Secretary of State, Permanent Secretary, very nice to see you. Can I just echo the comments as a former Minister of how nice it is to hear the degree of continuity of mission. There'll be disagreements about implementation, and our job is to hold you to account. But I think this sector is risky enough and long-term enough that continuity of mission is really key. And could I just personally, just to welcome the commitments that the government's made about growth, industrial strategy, and the 20 billion a year R&D in a difficult round. These are good signs. So I wanted to ask about growth, really. 3 linked questions. You've been very clear, Secretary of State, a very compelling vision of a digital department driving a much more digitalised government for citizenship, for public service efficiency, for growth. And I suppose the questions really are. One, does that mean that DSIT is really focused on that digital piece and not so much on the exploiting the other bits of science, research, technology, innovation, from semiconductors to advanced manufacturing to fusion to meteorology, and using those to drive growth? Does that responsibility now pass to DBT? I'm sort of wondering, under the science and technology framework, whether that's still a DSIT mission, or whether in the establishment of the new department that now shifts, really, that broader piece. And it'd be interesting just to hear politically, but also organisationally, PermSec, how that fits within the machinery of government. Linked point then on the private sector investment, whether, and you remember I tried to get this going, I confess, didn't finish it, but it seemed to me we really needed, if we're going to have a growth conversation, to know what the private sector figures are alongside the 20 billion public, by sector, by place, by department. And then thirdly, clusters, because if we're really going to harness R&D for growth around the country, how you measure that. So those are my three questions, really. Firstly, DSIT's role, and does it, being a digital department, mean that broader growth responsibility passes elsewhere?
Growth is going to become a priority for every government department. The Health Secretary has said quite wisely that actually, his is a growth department, because unless you have a healthy nation and you get the waiting lists down, we're not going to be able to maximise our potential as an economy. So every government department is tasked with figuring out its role within growth. There is, and I hope you will see as a committee, and I hope you'll see as just as members of Parliament who are scrutinising government, that you'll see a much more integrated workflow going forward between different departments. We know this is tough. We know it's easy to say at the start of a Parliament, but we are absolutely determined to deliver that going forward. In terms of our DSIT's direct influence on growth, there's a number of aspects to it. The first is the formal links that we will have to the industrial strategy. There's 7 priorities set out by the Department for Trade. We are leading on 2 of those. I think it's bioscience and technology, digital technology. So we will have a direct link into the industrial strategy. There will be certainly new priorities that come in with this government, with our agenda. And I'm not going to be naive and say that with prioritisation does not come deprioritisation. We're working through that now, and we'll be very upfront and honest when you see areas that we are, that are no longer the priorities of the government. We've settled the first spending review. We're out in the process of implementing and understanding what that means at a granular level, right the way through all of our funding bodies and all the different parts of DSIT. And when we have completed that process, we'll be very open about it, because we're not going to resile from it. But we're also taking on some of the challenge of diffusion of digital technology into the broader economy, which is why I would say that we are directly an economic department now. This is one of the things that I've struggled with the most coming in conceptually, because the economy is not uptaking digital technology enough, particularly the smaller end of the medium-sized business community. I think we're about 2/3 of the way behind America when it comes to organic adoption. Government can't do to the economy that kind of transition, but we can't stand back and say, well, it's not doing it organically to itself, so therefore there has to be a role for government to do so. I'm thinking very creatively here, and I have stopped some of the funding programs that we've inherited, so that we can take a look at how we can be more assertive with the digital technology take-up in the broader economy. Is that?
Yes, that is a bell. So we have a vote now. So I'm going to suspend the sitting, for 10 minutes, or as quickly as people can.
We're all going to vote against
back.
PR, Peter.
So, order.
We're all going to vote against PR.
Order. order. We're restarting the session interrupted for the vote. And I think, Secretary of State, you were just about to finish your remarks on clustering.
Yeah, the only other part of Mr. Freeman's question I didn't answer was about clusters. Here we are. Talking of clusters. Yeah, that's right. And the only thing I'll say on clusters is we recognise areas and partnerships that add up to more than the sum of their parts. There are clearly areas around in the scientific and research community that do that. I have spoken to the university sector to try and understand ways for which we can have greater leadership from universities in order to deliver greater clusters. Again, partnerships that add up to more than some of their parts. They need to have good, steadfast leadership with a clarity of vision. They'll be different for each area by definition, and that's what we need. And I'm very open to that conversation and quite keen to sort of pursue it in those terms. The second thing just to say on that is the AI Action Plan will have something to say about area-based development based on the opportunities that are offered by modern technology, science and innovation. And I think we'll probably pick up on that conversation at a future meeting.
Thank you. Could I ask, Chair, the Permanent Secretary, the same question, but it's more of a machinery of government point, and I'm very conscious of the work you did when we were setting up the department, without much notice. Whether, from your point of view, DCIT is still in the S&T framework, the lead department for turning R&D into industrial growth, and how, through the S&T framework, whether you've got the leadership, the leverage to drive that conversation across government, or again, whether that now sits more with DBT as the Industrial Strategy Department.
So there hasn't been any change in departmental responsibilities in that area. So, as far as we're concerned, we still play the same role that we did before, only with some kind of added tools in our box, as it were, when some of the work on digital and AI across the public sector interacts with our work on science innovation. For example, in the use of AI in healthcare would be an example that could fit into both of those categories. So I think it's an expansion and a strengthening, but there's been no reduction as part of that in focus on the areas that you're talking about.
Can I ask then, who in government, if it's not DCIT, who would be looking at the 20 billion R&D figure and saying, are we getting good private sector co-investment off the back of that?
That's at core a DCIT responsibility, obviously in partnership with both DBT and other sector-owning departments across government. You'd expect us to work with DEFRA on that question as it relates to farming. But for the question overall, I think that remains, effectively, it just remains exactly as it was before.
That's a very important point. And so what that says to me and to the committee is that we will be holding you to account for that interface between science, our 20.4 billion budget, and business, industry and growth, which is a key interface, and the success of that. It's a classic thing that the Britain is great at having ideas and very bad at turning them into money and jobs. So this is something that the committee will hold you to account on in the future, and I'm glad
I was going to say, I'm not going to pretend it's easy, but I think we need to get to a point where we can say, life sciences, we invest 9 billion a year, or whatever the figure is, and the private sector number is X and going up. Space is not going up, why not? Mm-hmm. And the same for the clusters. And I tried, but we didn't get over the line. But I think having some kind of data so that we can look and go, why is that public money not unlocking private? What are we doing wrong? I think is really important.
And if I might just say, because I think you'll be pleased to hear it, we've been working with ONS on how do we get better at being able to cut R&D data in a way that is intelligible by sector in the way that you're describing. We don't have those numbers yet, but that's in hand.
Great. Thank you. I'm now going to hand over to Kit.
Yeah, I just want to ask a couple of questions, one of which is connected. Obviously the leveraging in of private sector money is critical, and some of that is attracted by the co-funding or risk sharing or whatever it is that comes out of the budget. But quite a lot of it operates obviously within the wider fiscal environment. And do you think post-budget that fiscal environment is conducive to the kind of risk-taking that's required, for example, in life sciences, or are there particular areas where you'd like to see amendments perhaps to encourage the private sector to put its money where its mouth is?
Well, I think you've seen from the Investment Summit that we've been quite successful already in unlocking additional investment into the economy, particularly on technology and digital infrastructure. You'll have noticed that I've upgraded digital infrastructure to that of the critical national infrastructure. The planning reforms now take digital infrastructure as a national priority. The regulatory reforms that were called for by the sector, I think we might come to it, but the Regulatory Innovation Office, which is now up and running and piloting, these were the things that were being called for by industry, and delivering it so quickly into government has unlocked a lot of investment. So if you look at the 63 billion that was committed in the investment summit, 24.3 billion of that was directly AI related. You'll notice that over half of that committed was AI and also life sciences related. So I think we have shown success. The other thing I'll just put onto the radar in that regard is our ambition to, in certain circumstances, move to 10-year funding. We know that that is a very key way of unlocking greater private sector investment. We're at the moment figuring out and doing the detail on where that could be most effectively deployed. But we're very open-minded as to where that can be deployed. But our key metric for it is using it in circumstances where the stability that 10-year funding can offer will leverage and unlock private sector investment. We looked at the aerospace sector, where there's one particular area where up to 10-year funding was used in certain circumstances, and the returns that it unlocked from private sector investment was almost double than in other sectors. So I think it is a key motivation for us for moving in that direction.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, I am quite interested in the results of the investment summit. Would it be possible, do you think, to drop us a note with enunciating what the 24.3 billion of projects were, so that we can kind of track their progress? I'm very conscious, having been a government minister myself, that very often these announcements are made and then actually the implementation, they never quite transpire. And 3 years down the line, everybody's kind of forgotten. So it would be quite helpful for us to be able to at least track some of these, groundbreaking projects, particularly on the AI and life sciences, where I have a particular interest. I guess I was more probing you about the kind of retail capital investment. I mean, we'll often get big investments coming in that may or may not, let's see, materialise. Fingers crossed they do. But it's more about the kind of retail investment. So, for example, things like the Enterprise Investment Scheme are not necessarily brilliantly configured for investment in life sciences research, for example. I mean, the limitations on size are not brilliant, and I just wondered whether it was an area you were likely to look at. But I'll park that with you. I realise you're not the Chancellor. Obviously, the 8.5%, second question, obviously the 8.5% uplift was very welcome in R&D funding, which is great. But, and I hope you won't take this the wrong way, but given what we're debating today, obviously a proportion of that is swallowed up in national insurance contributions, given that a large number of it will be going to research scientists and others. Have you got a number of what the kind of deadweight cost is of that tax increase? And are you getting representations from organisations that will be impacted, like, for example, the CRIC, where we were on Tuesday? I mean, the CRIC employs, 1,500 people. It's got a budget of 200 and something million quid. I would imagine the NI cost to them is going to be 2 million plus, maybe. And have you had representations from those organisations about, in the same way that we're all getting it from hospices and what have you, about whether you can help them with it?
Well, the first thing to say is that the budget was, the first step forward when it came to stabilising university finances, and which is the majority of funding that goes through our R&D budget. We're not going to be able to get to where we need to be to offer the security that the university sector needs, and we as a country need them to be in one step. So yes, that uplift is going to directly benefit, plus also you've seen the tuition fees increase. So we were working in tandem across different departments to do our bit to make sure we can shore up the finances and the environment in which higher education and research facilities are operating within. We know that the budget impacts different organisations in different ways, but as I've already said, we've had the headline figure, but we're right in the process now of getting down to the weeds of how the funding is going to impact different sectors, different organisations as it filters through. We want to make sure this isn't just an across-the-board uplift, based on every award that was made in the last, year, 2 years, 3 years. We need to make sure that we are prioritising, really ruthlessly to make sure that we're delivering in those sectors that has the biggest potential, the research programmes that have the most impact, and we're choosing sort of as wisely as possible. So that process is unfolding now. So it's not possible to say how it will impact
So you
different
would be
institutions.
intending to put more money into areas that are impacted? We're
going to be investing in those areas that have the biggest impact in research potential.
Right.
As
Sorry,
aligned.
I thought you were implying you were going
no.
to look at what the impact is on the CRIC, say, of the National Insurance Rise and say, well, we'll give you another £3 million so you don't have to cut your research budget.
No, this is research focused, and right across government, we are supporting organisations in the scientific communities in different ways, particularly in universities. But as the Chancellor said at the dispatch box during the budget, we can't solve every problem in one go. But in those key areas, you can see where we are investing, where we are able to unlock private sector partnership investment in digital infrastructure, for example, through the use of R&D budgets. You'll see how we're partnering, leveraging. Our department in DSIT now is far more outward facing, and this is not a criticism of what went before, but we're far more outward facing, working in partnership, trying to design and use government spending as wisely as possible to unlock private investment as much as possible.
Give me, that's not really what I was asking about. I understand that. What I'm trying to get to is how much of the 8.5% is immediately going straight back to the Treasury.
As I said, we haven't allocated yet.
Right.
So,
but will we be able to get to an estimate of what that figure might be? Because some of that number will be on existing research programmes which you're continuing. Some of it will go to the CRIC, who are a standard organisation. Some of it will be new. But there must be a kind of impact within the department that's being assessed.
When you're talking about £13 billion worth of spending, and yet we haven't allocated the 8.5 uplift, it's impossible to say which areas we are going to get the uplift, or if there is going to be uplift, or which areas are going to get greater investment. So I'm sure it's something we can return to, but I think you'll see that R&D, science, life sciences in this country is in a good state and has a great potential ahead of it.
As I said, there was lots to welcome. Don't get me wrong.
No, I understand.
Work out what the figure is, that's all.
Do you want a short follow-up question on that?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, thank you, Secretary of State. So coming back to the point you made about moving towards a 10-year funding settlement, I just wondered how you might comment on how that might affect research staff contracts and particularly productivity around research staff, given the issues many research staff find short-term contracts mean they spend a lot of time looking for the next contract. I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Yeah, when we put together the programme of government, it's something we heard time and time again. We know that 3-year funding, for example, means that you spend the first year getting up and running, the second year doing, and then really the last 18 months you're sort of riven by insecurity about what happens next. And that's just not ideal in certain circumstances, not all, but it's not ideal in certain circumstances to get the best talent and for that talent to feel rooted and secure and planning for the long term. And it's not ideal when it comes to the potential for private sector investment getting involved in a project they know will be delivering over the long term. We don't know yet, and I would certainly very much welcome any insights the committee has to offer in areas where we could maximise the potential for 10-year funding. But just to say to the committee that we won't be taking our foot off the accelerator when it comes to expectations for extending from 1 to 3 to 10-year funding programmes. They'll be monitored, they'll be performance managed, and we'll have high expectations of what can be delivered. In fact, higher expectations of what can be delivered simply because of the potential for leveraging talent and investment in those programmes.
Thank you, Secretary of State. And certainly during the visit to the CRIC, we also heard how welcome the 10-year funding cycles would be. And I think I heard, Secretary of State, an expectation that would translate into greater security for early career researchers.
I hope so.
Great. Okay, now I'll ask Emily to come in on research and development.
Thank you. Nice to see you, Secretary of State. First of all, can I just really welcome a 10-year R&D settlement. It was one that I was not successful under the last Labour government in securing, but we argued for it vociferously. And it is really exciting in terms of efficiency, scientific discovery, also I wanted to direct the link to mission delivery. You have already said that that while your department isn't the lead in any single mission, it is essential for every single mission. And you, like us, have this cross-governmental role when it comes to R&D. So I wanted to understand, broader than just growth, but in each of those mission deliveries, how your department is able to influence or oversee the R&D spend in other departments, and how are you able to flex your own departmental spend in order to support those mission deliveries that are so essential?
Thanks. It's such a good question because we all know that the areas we cover, all of us in this room have a passion for the potential for science and technology and its achievements. Now, in government, of course, it's tenfold that, because there's a lot more that government needs to do in order to deliver for citizens up and down the country. We have 5 missions. We have 5 mission boards. I sit on 3 of the 5 mission boards. In the last budget, you may have missed, but the mission, a mission fund, an R&D mission fund, was created with £25 million. That mission fund, we are at the moment figuring out the details on how to allocate, but that is there. Patrick Vallance, spoke passionately about this in its development. He and I believe that science and technology, of course, is recognised across all of government and all government departments, but there are some singular challenges that are faced by those 5 missions which haven't been cracked by individual departments over time. Could it be with the relationship that DSIT has with stakeholders, with the scientific community that it funds through universities, with the ability to bring together partnerships? Could we take on and contribute to some of those singular challenges that have bedeviled departments and some of the challenges that governments of the past have faced? So that's the purpose of that fund. I hope we can show some successes so that perhaps we can build on it into the future. Who knows? And then with me having a formal link in 3 of the 5 missions brings us into the room. But you'll also see that there are work groups and work streams and workshops going on between DSIT and most government departments already to try and figure out what that specific relationship looks like. And as we build the digital centre, as we restructure DSIT, how it can evolve into a resource from which government departments can draw down on, because that's where I aspire our department to get to, not one for which we're beating down the door of government departments, but one for which we have resources that other government departments can't have and don't have access to internally, can't easily access from buying off the shelf externally. So therefore, we are a desirable resource for other departments to access.
If I could add one small thing, what we usually find is in any particular area of research, you've got a department that might be funding out of their own R&D money more applied research, and you'll have bits of DSIT money, for example, through UKRI that are going on some of the early stage research, and what we want to make sure is that whole journey is joined up. And so there are a whole series of sort of official-led structures that try to make sure that that's working well, and we usually find that's pretty positive and collaborative, because it's absolutely in everybody's interest to make sure that that spend is being used in a complementary way, where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's what I was trying to get to. Can I just have sort of a quick follow-up on a very specific bit of your funding, which does, again, lead to how we work together, but this is on a global scale. You're allocated a proportion of the ODA spend, the Official Development Assistance Programme. Just wondering what priorities you have for that spend over the coming year, and how you sort of see that funding that sits within DSIT developing in terms of our global role in science.
That's right. DSIT contributes to the global programme, the International Science Partnerships Fund. We will be maintaining support for that fund. I haven't yet made decisions on whether we adjust that funding based on global trends and the priorities of this government, but we certainly seek to leverage the very best of the British scientific community and put that to good use for global use, and that will continue. You'll know that I have a background in international development as well. These are issues that I do care personally very, very deeply about.
And we'd expect to refresh those priorities sort of more formally as part of the SR2 process coming up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And the spend on science, which is outside the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, is considerable. It's about £7 billion. The committee recently wrote to you to ask if you could report to us on science spend across government as the champion for science, and also to enable us to better track and scrutinise it. And you wrote back to say that you would look to do so, which we very much appreciate. You didn't give a timeline as to when you would be able to get back to us with an update or progress. Can I just ask you to give that now?
You're right that I and we are the champion of science across government, but the Treasury is the champion of money across government. And they are the department that does hold the data that you're after. We don't hold the granular data of individuals spending, but what we are trying to do in response to your letter, in order to be as constructive as possible, is to figure out how DSIT can work with the Treasury so that we can make sure your committee has the information that it needs, whether it comes via the Treasury or whether it comes via my department.
How quickly would you expect to make progress on
well, in due course.
Thank you. Lauren, you wanted to follow up, I think, on the research and development.
Oh, yeah, on the research.
Skills. Yes.
That's right. So looking at developing growth and all those sorts of things, we need people with the skills and the kind of the pipeline for science. So you said that you sit on the 3 different boards. How are we identifying the skills gaps, but also inspiring youngsters to choose science with practical skills?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really broad question. Firstly, we're working very closely with the Department of Education. They are, of course, establishing Skills England at the moment. They're also undertaking the largest review of the national curriculum for secondary education for a generation. And DSIT is integral to those reviews. We're feeding in as much as possible, and I have to say the Department for Education has been very open-hearted in the way that it's been engaging with us on that. We want to make sure that the voice of science is heard loud and clear. Popularising science is something that successive governments has struggled with. Sometimes it's actions that happen outside government which captures people's imagination. But we have had conversations about how we can raise the profile of science. We're really fortunate if you look at just the latest round of Nobel Prizes, to have 2 British-born scientists, one of whom, Demis Haspel, is still living, working, leading science in a really inspirational way here in the UK. I think that it was a good moment for science to see that, and I think it's one that certainly will persist. I'm very open-minded as to how government plays a role in inspiring generations of young people by science. It's just when you say the words government and inspire, they're not often words that sit in the same sentence comfortably. But I'm very open-minded. Now, another thing that I've been trying to do is meet some of the social media influencers who are, because there are some, there's a school teacher that's rapping science that I met with and been in touch with, who has hundreds and hundreds of thousands of followers of young people. And these are people I think that we need to not ask them to come onto our turf and start explaining nerdy policy in our language, but we need to be as available as absolutely possible to explain ourselves and to fit our information into terms for which they are outstanding communicators for.
Well, did you have a quick
just a quick supplementary on the skills point. There was a thing in DFE called the Future Skills Unit, I think, and I was, as Minister of State for Science, quite frustrated because when you went around the clusters around the country and asked what's holding you back, whether it's the Glasgow Space Cluster or the Teesside Hydrogen Cluster, very often the answer was lack of skilled staff coming through the system. And when I asked the DFE Future Skills Unit, that was more of a bottom-up look at the curriculum. And it seemed there was a gap between the regional R&D clusters and the skills. And I just leave it with you that in the new wiring of Whitehall, I think that'll be an issue we keep returning to.
I hear you. I'll take it back.
I think everybody in this committee is particularly keen to, if you like, to say, champion science and its positive influence, and to engage with young people and people of all ages. And we'll be following closely how, given the change and the growing importance of science in everybody's lives, science and technology, we'll be following closely how the government can reflect and build on that and equip everyone with the skills they need. Now, I think, Adam, I was going to hand over to you to look at startups and scale-ups. Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And I thank you both again. I asked this next one as the MP for Erewash, which is a constituency in the East Midlands, consistently the worst funded region in this space. And we've got a lot in my constituency, particularly of startups and scale-up businesses. So the question is, how are we going to improve the environment and the landscape for startups and scale-ups?
Mm-hmm. We know that there's something missing in our landscape, for our investment landscape, and quite often I hear just the sort of general statement that we're not good at it. So let's be really proud about what we are really good at. We are really good at starting up. You know, on the continent of Europe, we have more startups per head of population than anyone else. You know, we're consistently near the top of the league globally on startups. But there is a challenge that our economy faces, and that's from startup to scale up, and then for the higher end of scale up, it dwindles. And there is clearly a challenge with a lack of capital that's available in the economy. And we are a global economy. We are an open, quite rightly, an open and outward-facing trading nation. That means that we have to compete and think globally. And when you have the potential for businesses and innovators to accept the sort of timeline that goes with this very significant investment that can sometimes come from Silicon Valley, it's sometimes just too tempting for them to ignore, and sometimes they would feel irresponsible for them to ignore because they might miss out domestically. So I think we're good at startups, and I, if there's anything specific about your area that I need to know, then I'm all ears for it. The Chancellor is carrying on the Mansion House process started by Jeremy Hunt when he was Chancellor, but we have accelerated the programme of reform for pensions. We know that we need to get capital into our economy. We know that capital needs to be diverted towards areas of growth, which is supporting innovation and getting it out into the economy as quickly as possible. I think the Chancellor has moved really swiftly on that, and that's something I think that we will be noticing a difference for rapidly. The other barriers to innovation and upskilling, and one of the things that's been driving people away has been the regulatory landscape here, which sometimes can be too burdensome. So setting up the Regulatory Innovation Office, which is in DSIT, that will take on, where we have an innovation which aligns with the priorities of the nation. We want to make sure that the regulatory landscape, the regulators themselves, are taking on some of the burden of compliance, and we are expediting it safely through that regulatory process, so that innovators, right at the point where we need them to be commercialising, they're not just so bogged down with compliance that they just give up and go elsewhere for it. So there are lots of different things that we can do. It's not just investment, that we can become the partner people need. Mr. Freeman said just a moment ago, talking about the sense of partnership. When I go and meet all these innovators, whether it's in the higher education, private sector, or elsewhere, everything is partnership based. Partnerships and clusters are so commonplace up and down the country. And when you ask about what the role government has been in their journey, usually the conversation stops or it slows, eyes go down to the floor or eyes roll around the room. And it is always a story of planning problems, regulatory problems, funding problems, or taking too long to get what it takes. You know, I, perhaps naively, but certainly I don't mind being called a utopian, I hope that this government, over the decade of national renewal of which we stood at the last election, can get to the point where there are innovators out there that see government as a partner towards getting their innovation out into the economy, benefiting the health and wealth of our nation, rather than always being the thing that holds people back.
The point you make about startups is really important. I think we are good at that. Focusing on the scale-ups, though, I've heard a lot of local small businesses saying we struggle with scale-up, and actually often we have to turn abroad for funding for scale-up. How are we going to work on that kind of scale-up aspect?
So we have to tackle the investment landscape. Our economy is undercapitalised. I've even had senior figures from London Stock Exchange coming and explaining where the issues are. And it'll be very hard for us to compete in terms of overall capital that's at the disposal of some investors and venture capitalists when it comes to the speed with which Silicon Valley VCs can invest. But we can offer other incentives to stay as well. And we certainly are looking very closely at how we can get more capital into the sector and also make sure that we can incentivise the investment landscape as much as possible. The Treasury is currently looking at this. DCIT is looking and working with the Treasury to see how we can get that sector more mature. The larger through the rounds of investment that companies need, there are fewer and fewer VCs and other sources of finance that are available here. So everyone ends up going to the same few, and it becomes more and more burdensome because there are fewer of them. The risk profile gets higher with each investment. That is a problem that government can't solve on its own, but we can create the economic landscape into the future that can try and tackle it. And where we have the innovation that the UK government and regulatory landscape is incentivising to stay here, where there is the thirst for innovation to be put to use within Britain, then hopefully the investors and VCs will come and see their role as landing here, investing here, and domiciling here into the future. That's certainly what we're working towards.
Great, and tying into everything you've just said, actually, Secretary of State. So the skills we know sits within Department of Education, and you've said before that decisions on those talent visas lies with the Home Office. I think we've touched on it a little bit, but can we commit definitely to cross-government approach there, and can we work closely with the Home Office to make sure that those international talented people, shall we say, are coming over here and focusing their talents in the British economy?
Britain is the best place in the world to come and put your scientific skills to use. You'll be rewarded for it, you will be celebrated for it, and you will find a great environment to work in. I don't underplay or downplay the challenge that the Home Secretary has in dealing with the overall migration challenge the country faces. But she's also engaging fully with departments about the specific sectoral opportunities that exist out there as she makes those tough decisions going forward.
And final question from me, Secretary of State. So the government's review of technology, how's that going to differ from the previous review that was done on pro-innovation regulation of technologies? And will the Responsible Technology Adoption Unit play a role in delivering on its findings?
You want me to take that one?
Do you want to take that, Sandy? Because it's comparing two that I wasn't involved in.
Yeah, so the previous GCSA review was specifically about regulation. This is much more about actually what would it take to get the technology fully adopted. So not coming at the lens that the issue is necessarily regulation. And indeed, we know that for a lot of the well-established technologies, the reason that a small business doesn't, for example, adopt a CRM system, that's not a regulatory issue. There are a whole series of other issues that are preventing people from taking technology up. So it's starting at that end of the spectrum. What is the problem? What would it take for a set of interventions to really make a difference to the problem the Secretary of State talked about earlier in this session around technology adoption? Of course, it will kind of suck out and adopt all of the wisdom of that previous review. It's not going to be looking again at that. And DCIT officials from the team that you mentioned and others are obviously very closely involved in the work of that review.
Thank you both. Thank you, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you. And just to pick up on the points that Adam was raising there, we took evidence from Make UK, from the Startup Coalition, from the Royal Society, which all pointed to skills being a key barrier to scaling up, to maintaining our position in world-leading research. And so whether we need to look at skills both from the point of view of the curriculum review and and driving home-based skills, but also access to skills from global talent base. And we hope that is something that as Adam talked about, the government is looking at on a cross-governmental basis, and that you'll be able to come back to us with progress in that area. And the other point I just wanted to ask you directly, Secretary of State, is Adam talked about some of the regional aspects of growth, and that's a huge opportunity in this country to get growth levels across our country, the same as we have, say, in the greater southeast. The previous government did make commitments around targeting the level of R&D spend outside of the greater southeast and the growth in that level. Can I ask if you'll be looking at it on a regional basis yourselves, or if you're looking at it in different perspectives? You talked about priorities earlier.
No, I am.
Yeah.
Of course, yes, we will be, continuing to look at the regional aspects, and also, committing to those targets. But for me, we have several opportunities going forward. When you see what the new DCIT is doing and the way that we are, restructuring DCIT, we are going to be active in diffusing technology into the economy. We're going to be using technology and data, to a far more strident way to make sure that we can get the digital transformation of government and the relationship citizens have. That means we have to have a set of reform principles that we apply. And one of those has to be that every citizen from across the United Kingdom has access to and benefits equally to this latest reform that government will be undertaking. Does, for example, a technology level up opportunity for individuals around the country? Is equity built in from the outset? Because we know full well that it's not at the moment. And we'll be speaking more in the coming weeks and the coming period about digital inclusion. This is something that I care very deeply about. Chris Bryant will be leading on, and we'll have some announcements in due course on it. But these are principles that have to be baked in from the absolute outset in order to get it right. I know that you have championed diversity in science, Madam Chair. I know that there is a long way to go, and I would say the challenge extends beyond science and it goes into the technology sector. And if you would allow me just one moment to reflect, because I had a pretty difficult pathway through education myself, and my journey getting into university was not a smooth one. Reflecting back on it, it was quite obvious that no individual said that people from my background shouldn't go to university, so therefore, he's rejected. But the system itself was very, very clever at diverting people like me away from it. And it was only through persistence and going back to school at the age of 25 to secondary school that I got in. I see something that's not dissimilar within parts of science and technology today, where every organisation will have programs, every organisation and individual will care quite deeply about diversity in their organisations, but the system overall is pretty good at diverting some people from certain backgrounds with other characteristics away from their organisations and their sectors. And I think it's something that we need to reflect on, and certainly some of those sectors need to reflect on.
Thank you, Secretary of State. And I think the whole committee shares my pleasure in hearing that commitment. Every member of this committee has a background or connection with science and engineering, and I'm very pleased that we have women on this committee and who have huge experience and who can act as, I think, as role models in that regard, and who all share your commitment very much. We'll be very much scrutinising the commitment to increasing diversity. Now we're going to move. We've talked already about the digital centre of government, which is a significant change in DCIT's remit and a significant part of the government's ambition. I'm going to ask Josh to kick us off on some inquiring on that regard.
Thanks, Chair. As you know, Secretary of State, I'm extremely excited about this agenda and element of DCIT's new remit. So I wanted to really ask about some of the specifics about what the digital centre of government means and how we can sort of judge how it's going. So the first question about measurement. How are you and how should the committee and most importantly the public judge and measure how what success looks like in terms of that aspect of DSIT's role?
Thanks very much. The Digital Centre is now quite publicly spoken about and quite widely known. What's not known is I've also set up a delivery unit within DSIT because DSIT has never been a delivery department before in that sense. We will be delivering services to citizens, which you'll see next year. You'll see, obviously, we are now responsible for gov.uk and One Login. Further services are being onboarded into that at regular intervals now. Each time they do so, it drives efficiencies throughout government. But crucially, it makes life so much easier for citizens and people when they try to access government services themselves. And the One Login app is very successful. Recognition of gov.uk is ubiquitous throughout Britain, and we want to build on those brands for which you'll see next year. The delivery unit is now up and running, and we're in the process of having a dashboard, you'll be pleased to hear, that I can access as Secretary of State for all of the priority areas that I intend to deliver on into the future. I will try and find a way that's appropriate for the committee to be updated in a more regular way on the delivery of individual programmes, because there's going to be a lot of programmes. The 3 reports or the 2 reports and 1 action plan coming up into the new year. You're going to see a series of announcements as well. And it's incredibly important for me as Secretary of State to feel as connected to that delivery as possible. It is true that when you become Secretary of State, you feel quite distant from the front line of delivery. I want to close that gap as much as I possibly can in the way that I am accessible in doing the job, but also that I have the metrics that I can update, almost daily, weekly progress with those key priorities. Citizens will notice that government is coming closer to them in the coming year. You will be able to demonstrably see actions within government which are leading to efficiencies, effectiveness and tackling fraud across government. These are things for which you can hold me personally and my department to account for.
On that point there, if that's all right. So some of my experience on King County Council and the dashboards and scorecards that we got presented, that everything is absolutely rosy, and it isn't and it wasn't. You mentioned in there about that kind of the touch point with reality in the case of actually things are getting better, things are feeling better. How will you be able to share those milestones alongside the KPIs?
Well, I have a slight advantage because I'm setting it up for the first time, and so it will be modelled in really in what I've asked for specifically, and that is granular information on the progress of projects and priorities for the department. Sarah and I speak about this quite often, and we're trying to make sure we get it right. I'm not going to be doing all of this in public because I want to find areas of underperformance and give it the support it needs to get up to speed. I want to find areas that are excelling and make sure that reward and the talent that's driving success is rewarded appropriately. And that will be the ethos for this department. DSIT has never, in its sort of 18-month, 2-year existence, had to think about people, about citizens, because it's always been broadly a funding body. And now DSIT thinks very, very much about the citizen experience. And that is something that, just last week on a joint visit to St Thomas's, looking at scanning equipment, which is having a profound impact on cancer patients. And that's a joint project funded by UKRI, which is now having a profound impact on the front line of health and radiography in this country. So I just want to make sure that the department itself thinks of the citizen experience as it executes its daily business in all parts of DSIT, not just in those one project areas.
Thank you. Thanks. I think Josh wanted to come back in and then Martin.
I was going to ask about the data library, so we can come back to that.
Okay. Martin.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you. Nice to meet you.
You too.
It sounds like a fantastic, fascinating department that you run. I can't imagine how you pick that up and get into that within 5 months. So that's amazing. I've got a few more sort of, I suppose, practical questions. Looking at some of the things in the Data Use and Access Bill. I've got 4 questions, I think. How ready are you, for what I understand, the review of the adequacy decision of data transport between UK and EU, which is due, I think, in June next year? How ready are we for that review?
We're ready for the review. The relationship that I established in the first fortnight or couple of weeks of coming into office with the European Commission is one that I welcomed. We've had several conversations now from my position with the relevant commissioner in the European Union, and I think we've reached a pretty good place on this. There'll be announcements coming up. They have their processes that they need to go through, and discretion is very important for them. We have our processes to go through, and discretion is important to us. And of course, the legislative program as well means that certain things we can, guarantee and not, because the EU wants to see legislation pass before meeting the criteria they have. But I'm very content with the place that we've landed with the relationship with them.
Excellent. That sounds good. And how do you plan? I mean, looking at the changes that you're proposing for the information, the ICO. Sorry, my voice is a bit bad today. How are you ensuring that it retains the full levels of independence that it requires to keep that adequacy levels?
I'm completely content simply because the Information Commissioner himself has fully endorsed the changes that we've made and the direction of travel that we've had. I think we have in that particular office independence baked into it. We also have an Information Commissioner that speaks very, very candidly, as you'll see when you have him before the committee at any point. I don't think there's any chance that that's a commissioner or a commission that is going to in any way be pushed around by government.
Fantastic, thank you. And a couple of other things in the bill. What's it called? The NAU, the map of everything that's underground.
NUAR.
NUAR, sorry.
National Underground Asset Register.
National Underground Asset Register. Fantastic. So having come from a local council background where we have literally in the past 3 months had to change the route, the idea of putting trees in the pedestrianised area of the street because they suddenly found pipes underneath. How do you deal with the accuracy of the data? Because the data as presented is not reality. And I couldn't see in the descriptions. I can see lots of requirements to lodge data. I can't see processes for updating and judging the accuracy of the data that is in there. Is there anything there to deal with that?
The fact that we stood on a prospectus, a manifesto based on a decade of national renewal, has given license to people like me, who thank you for your words at the beginning, I am having the time of my life in this job. It gives license to people like me to undertake programs that are going to take quite a long time to come to fruition. The National Data Library is another example of it, but that shouldn't stop us starting now. For me, something that I am unlikely to be in the position of being Secretary of State for when it comes to fruition means I just want to get it started quicker and lay the foundations for it, rather than just seeing it as something you kick into the long grass. The map that you're referring to is going to take a long time to get right, but the fact that we haven't had it for 200 years and that the majority of roadworks that blight communities' lives and people's lives aren't actually doing, they're just exploring in order to know what's under the ground so they can start the work that needs to happen, is something that's just gone on far too long. We all see this as constituency MPs. I did a visit to Worthing where they have a heat network which is being installed at the moment, which is staggering. They have a huge heat exchanger on top of a car park. The heat network is going through the city and heating public buildings and soon to be heating streets and neighbourhoods too. They discovered unexpectedly when they were digging one street up that there was a very thick, so clearly a very significant live electrical wiring, which they felt was multiple decades old, and they still, after several weeks of inquiry, couldn't say where it started or where it ended. They have no idea what this is actually powering, and it's pretty extraordinary to know that we live in a country where that kind of infrastructure is under our feet, but nobody actually understands what on earth it's there for. So it will take time, but we will make as much progress as possible as swiftly as we can.
I'm delighted that you've started that, because that is long overdue. Like you say, that's been the blight of most of our lives for a long, long time.
When I was working at Ofcom in 2007, we tried to do that just for telecoms infrastructure. And to your point, Martin, the level of data was such that we decided we couldn't do it. The lack of accurate data.
When I first started my professional career, we tried to do that for telephone lines for one customer, and we couldn't even do that because they didn't know what they were paying for. They were paying the bills, and they didn't know where these phones were. Final question is about the words in here about the determination of information standards in the NHS. Now, I think, again, it's not to be underestimated. I saw 15 different definitions for one TLA that was used in terms of whether people turned up for their appointment or left or whatever they did in there. What level of... There are words in here, but I think the process is yet to be sort of described, perhaps. I mean, how does that go forward to become useful, not only in terms of the nature of the information, but also the exchange of information within the NHS? Is there is this, again, like the NUAR, something that is a start, or is this a...
No, we anticipate some fairly rapid movement here. The use of data in the NHS is a real challenging issue. There's a lot of legacy systems, different health trusts to primary care settings, to individual hospitals are using different data being stored in different ways that often aren't interoperable within the same health trust, let alone between health trusts. We need to put information in the hands of citizens. We need to make sure that doctors have access to as much information as possible, simply because patients need that, and it delivers to better health outcomes. You know, I have somebody who is in my private office at the moment. Congratulations to her, because she's just become pregnant. But the maternity card that she has to carry around is a physical card, which comes through the post. She then has to put manually in writing onto it her national insurance number and the rest of her details. And she has to carry this yellow bit of card around with her all the time, so that maternity nurses can update in writing what's happening and the progress with her pregnancy. And should she be somewhere and need to have some kind of medical attention, or goes into early labour and doesn't have that card with her, there is no way of accessing the information that medical professionals have been collating about her pregnancy. This is absurd. I mean, it is utterly absurd that we still live in this world. And these are the issues that the data bill, seeks to start to modernise. Now, there's a couple of areas to say. Firstly, the spread of innovation through the NHS is now a Secretary of State level responsibility. That is important, because we need to actually work it. The Office of Life Sciences, chaired jointly between myself and the Health Secretary, we've met and interacted with jointly. You'll see that the work that DCIT has with another government department, which is most advanced, is health. The data bill itself will require common frameworks and use of data, absolutely appropriately for the first time, but it will also require the sharing of data within existing GDPR regulations, so we will never dilute the need for safety, privacy and respect for individuals' data. But we do need it to serve people better, and that means that the NHS has to get serious about the way it shares data within the NHS itself. So the data bill will put quite strident requirements for it. It is long overdue. And the Health Secretary will need, and the Department of Health and the NHS will have to implement these requirements. The bill stipulates, outcomes. They are going to have to get cracking pretty soon with delivering on it, not just because of the bill, but because this is the way that they need to move forward to serve the patients in the way that is fit for the 21st century.
Data is a key area of so much of what your department is doing, what we're looking at. So there's a lot of interest. I'm going to ask Emily and then Alison to come back on this point.
At 4:30, so...
I think we all have to go at 4:30.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
So just to follow up on that point, you're right, we've got to get the NHS right, but if we're to be serious about our ambitions around health and social care, and particularly other support that may be cross-governmental. How are you future-proofing that so that NHS and, let's say, a local authority on the social care side would be able to share data in order to best support that? And what are the kind of what's your future map looking like in terms of how that data sharing between public authorities, government departments happens around the individual while protecting their data?
You just perfectly described the need for the National Data Library. And the National Data Library is in the scoping phase now. This is going to take a long time to deliver, but we are expediting it as quickly as we can. It's being led by Maggie Jones, who's our outstanding minister from the House of Lords. We are, over time, all government data from central government, public services, local government, the regions and the nations will have to share data in a way which is interoperable and standardised so that it can safely be used, respecting people's privacy, and collated between government departments where necessary, but stored in a way that can be accessed for research purposes, again, safely, respecting privacy, anonymised, so that we can make sure we are fully capitalising on the potential that data has to transform the scientific understanding of medicine in the 21st century, in the digital age. And if we do that, of course, this has the benefit of tackling the challenge you've just outset about interoperability. But on top of that, it means that we can use and turbocharge the British scientific community and access to data from within our country that can provide a scientific resource that no other country can have, and when used wisely, securely, can actually lead to the kind of medical leaps and bounds that the potential for British science has. And that is why it is worth starting it now. The National Data Library is in its scoping phase now, and into the new year you'll start to hear more specifics about how we move forward.
We'll ask Alison and then Josh to come in.
Just want to on the aspects of the data access and data use and access bill, and it links back to your wanting to really transform lives for citizens and make it easier. So one aspect of that is digital identity, and I have to say that I am chair of the Digital Identity APPG, so I'll just mention that one. And I met an amazing officer from the Office of Digital Identity and Attributes, and is really excited about the potential transformational change of having this identity verification system going through. At the moment, it's only accessing HMRC, the Welsh Revenue, and the Revenue in Scotland. Is there any plans to broaden that to other government departments? So, for example, DVLA, because we know that it used to be in gov.uk Verify system, they had access to that, and driving license are sort of a de facto identity document, which is one of the most used ones for fraud. So trying to ensure that citizens are able to verify their identity safely, protecting their data and protecting them from fraud and scams is really important. So are you planning to broaden this out across all government departments?
Yeah, thank you. The one login requires, the verification app, which has now been downloaded, I believe, 7 million times. That means that people can log in to one login safely and securely. They will know that the data that they share and the interaction they have with the government services will be done securely. We can know, as a government, that the people accessing those services are the people that they say they are. That is absolutely essential. As services onboard into gov.uk and one login, then of course access to those services will widen. HMRC is in the process of onboarding. DVLA is in the process of onboarding into one login, and again they will benefit from all of those services. It also drives quite considerable efficiency savings when government organisations onboard into it. There's a capital outlay, but the savings actually start in year, so there's a lot of incentives for doing so. So that yes, there will be. The data bill also, don't forget, provides the legal framework for the private issuance of digital ID.
Yes, I was about to ask.
Okay. Do you want me to carry on talking?
No,
or
carry
do you want
on,
not?
yeah.
Okay. Stop me if I'm not framing the question in the way that you'd hoped. But the bill will provide the legal framework for private sector provision of digital ID. And that is a market for which there is considerable demand, and we're one of the very few advanced economies that doesn't allow digital ID to be provided by the private sector, backed up by the government. So there will be a kite mark issued by the government for those who adhere to all of the standards that we would expect. We believe that the market for that could reach £800 million. But crucially, there are a lot of people, particularly young, who need digital ID services. If you're renting, if you want to go out to a bar and so forth, there's lots of very obvious demand for it. And I think the combination of one login for accessing digital services, the private provision of digital ID, outright digital ID services, takes us a big step forward.
And they'll be signed up to the trust framework. But these private providers, will they have access to the same data, such as DVLA data and stuff like that, as one login, or where are they going to get their data from?
Forgive me if that's too technical for me to go into all the detail, but there is the mechanism for government to provide secure identification purposes, simply to guarantee that the person is the person they say they are, but we're not involved in the provision of digital ID services. But we do need to make sure that national standards are upheld and that the person who is being issued with a digital ID is a British citizen who is able to access services.
A final
in the UK.
comment on that, Olga, about it, we just don't want to have, we want to have a simpler system where not everybody's having 3,000 apps for digital verification on their phone, and that we have a sort of a simpler version of that. So that was the point I was trying to get at. But thank you.
Thanks very much, Secretary of State. When will I have access to this digital ID?
Well, it depends on the Houses of Parliament. Now, if you could have a word...
It's supposed to be a brief question.
If you could have a word with the colleagues in the House of Lords who've just tabled 230 amendments to it, then we could certainly expedite it through Parliament as quickly as possible.
Are you saying that as soon as this Act is passed, every British citizen will be able to access a digital ID if they want one?
Via the private sector, yes.
Sorry?
Via the private sector,
Via the
yes.
private sector.
Yes.
Okay. Excellent. So, Josh, you wanted to come back on the digital library, I think.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up on the very exciting sounding National Data Library. Is that data purely for research purposes, or given the kind of value and interesting patterns that you might find in it that are helpful, is there the possibility that it can be used for delivery purposes too in the future?
So the data library is going through its scoping phase now. We will consult very, very extensively as we move every step forward. I am very, very aware that data is a sensitive issue, which is why my language has been very measured about reassuring the public that privacy, safety has to be baked in from the outset, and we have to not just say it will be, we have to demonstrate to the public and people that their data will be kept safe and secure, and that they are in control of their data. As we move forward, each step of the way we will need to take the public with us, because if we lose the confidence of the public, we won't be able to achieve the things. We learned that with GM crops in previous generations. And we understand what it's like when government loses the argument with the public, even when there might be solid scientific evidence for it, for the purpose of it. So we're very mindful of that. But the crucial element now is for scientific purposes for the National Data Library. But let's not confuse that with what government departments should be doing already. And we are way behind. Not just a couple of other countries, but the thing that frustrates me isn't when we get behind other countries, it gets behind what we are capable of as a government and a country itself. I think the NHS has a really good app in many ways. It can get a lot better. There's a lot more that we could be doing and showing much more ambition about getting government into people's pockets. And for me, as a progressive politician, this is personal as well. I care passionately about the welfare state. But the bigger the gap between the way that people interact with the welfare state and they interact with banking, commerce and shopping services and the rest of their life, the bigger that gap gets, the more vulnerable I believe our welfare state is. So there are lots of reasons why we should be reforming and modernising our state, and in the digital age that has to fully integrate digital technology, and there's no reason why you have to wait for a data library before doing that, because government departments really should be doing so with enthusiasm now, not enthusiasm because reformers like myself go on about reform. We should be doing it because every citizen of our country wants the government to be accessible, they want to be empowered with information, and they want to have greater control over their lives in a way that reflects the way they lead their lives today. And too often, citizens have to fit in with public services and government. Really, we should be in the business of fitting in with people's lives.
Thank you, Secretary of State. And I think you've set out really powerfully the prize of digital transformation and the prize of digital government, the progressive prize, as you champion citizens and their data and their control of their lives and government in your pocket. I just want to touch briefly before we move on to artificial intelligence on a point that hasn't been raised so much, which is the workforce issues, and in this case will be particularly the civil service. We heard in a private session on procurement that public IT, I think actually the phrase was that there has been no big successful public IT procurement project. And we also heard from the TUC at the importance of involving the workforce. And I, as an engineer, technologist myself, technology isn't diffused, and yet unless those who are using it are drawing it or are demanding it in. So can I ask how, just briefly if you can, how you are working with the civil service across governmental, to create that demand for this digital transformation, and I note that the advisory board that you've set up with led by Martha Lane Fox on public service transformation, it doesn't include any representation from the trade unions, and I wondered if that was perhaps a gap.
It might be a gap. I'm happy to look at it. If you see areas that I could be doing better or I may have overlooked, then I'll never be defensive about that. The interministerial group I mentioned before, the first thing we did back in July was put a moratorium on all non-critical digital spend across government of more than £1 million, so that had to be referred in so that we could check that it conformed to the standards and the priorities that this government has. We are trying to get a grip on digital procurement, digital investment across government, and coordinate it and make sure that actually it's taking account of the needs that we've already spoken about in the conversation that we've had today. The second aspect to it is the capacity of the digital centre itself. I believe that when you see the scope and scale of what we have created, that it is already attracting people that have previously not been attracted to working for government for lots of different reasons. The scale of what we're capable of doing, the scale of the ambition that we have as a government, our willingness in certain circumstances to remunerate in ways that recognise the highly skilled nature of it, and it would be very good to have your support as a committee when the decisions I have to take in certain regards of that have to be made. I've come across a lot of people, and it's not widely. It sounds counterintuitive, but it's not. There's a lot of people in the tech sector who are highly remunerated, highly qualified, very highly skilled. They care very deeply about public service, but have never really had the ability to express it before or feel the pathway into it. I hope the Digital Centre and the Safety Institute, which we might come to, the AI Safety Institute, are doing work of a quality and calibre that actually can attract that kind of talent into it. So when it comes to buying off the shelf, I acknowledge that too often government departments have and do buy off the shelf in ways that the data is locked into contracts which are too long. The data isn't interoperable between other government departments. It gets locked away, and it becomes very difficult to move away from certain systems at the other end. I hope at some point we can have a specific conversation about legacy systems, because they are blighting our ability to get our government to where it needs to be, and that is a very major problem. It's a capital problem as well as a technical problem, and it is also a national security problem that we face. But ultimately, you will see a lot of the areas that we will be talking about into the future are being designed in-house, either with the digital centre, with the support of the digital centre, or within specific capabilities that are coming into public services. And that, I think, is exemplified by the work of gov.uk, One Login, and some of the other areas that we're trialling within the civil service at the moment, trying to bring digital technology and AI in, all of which designed in-house to a standard that easily matches what is available out there. And that's a credit to the civil service officials and the creativity that people who have brought into government their expertise.
That's very good to hear. Now, we mentioned briefly AI, and I think, Alison, you wanted to come in on...
Yes. Well, thank you for mentioning legacy systems. They're a bugbear of mine. Just before I ask they're actually quite short questions. Right at the beginning in your opening speech, I think I might have misheard, but you referenced the AI action plan, and then you went, but I call it the reform plan, and that sort of pricked my ears up. So could you explain that?
Of course. Sorry, I should have made more clear. I commissioned 3 reports the week I came into office. The first is the AI action plan, which is all about action. 2 other reports, the digital state of the state, is a review which will be reporting in the forthcoming period, which is a review of every government department and its capabilities and its skills, the digital skills that exist within each government department. It's going to shine a light on the digital capacity of each government department. That's the second report. The third one is the structure of the digital centre and how it relates to its ability to deliver, because the action plans and the policies I'm announcing give purpose, but we need to have the structure that matches the purpose. So I commissioned a third review into the digital centre itself. So 2 reviews really, I think, are about reform of the state. The third report, or the first one that I mentioned, the AI action plan led by Matt Clifford, is an action plan that is about the broad society and our capacity as a country to meet and exploit the AI potential that we have as a country, and how government has agency to help the country get there.
I'm so glad I checked. I thought you were trying to reform AI, and I thought, oh, go for it. This is like, talking of which, the AI bill, in its in various sort of things, AI safety bill, AI bill, was originally suggested by the prior government, very focused on LLMs at that point. You've reiterated in the King's speech that is happening, a very tightly focused bit of legislation and sort of reducing current regulatory uncertainty. So can I just ask, what will be the key components of the upcoming AI bill?
Thank you. Just to clarify, the previous government had a voluntary code. The previous government I praise for establishing the AI Safety Institute. I think the Prime Minister at the time, Rishi Sunak, did our country and also did our country a good by establishing that, but also contributed towards a global good, because the expertise that has emerged from that Safety Institute is leading the way on understanding safety, and also absolute credit to the people who are driving that institute, because the institute itself is delivering safety work which is keeping up with the conceptual work of the frontier labs themselves, and that is quite a feat, and is something that we should recognise is something which we should have national pride in. But I just simply don't think that when you think of the power of the emerging technology of frontier AI, we're not talking about frontier, not general purpose AI. When you see the capacity and the potency of that technology, I think the time has come to put it on a statutory footing. What I'm not seeking to do, and let me be very clear about this, is to disrupt the settled regulatory levels that have been existed by the voluntary code. I'm not changing the voluntary code itself. I'm merely putting it onto a statutory footing. And I think when people understand in more detail the potency and capacity of some of the emerging technology that's coming out there, I don't think any of us as individuals could go onto TV and then justify why, when you have a technology of this power to do great good for our country, but also to pose some quite specific challenges for our country, that we should leave such power as a voluntary code among the companies themselves. So let me just be clear, because it is incredibly important to the sector who might be listening. I am not disrupting the regulatory level that we have reached through voluntary code. I will merely be enshrining that code onto statutory footing, and doing a second thing, which is making the Safety Institute into an arm's length body, so that it has the sector itself and the country can see that we have a safety capacity in our country that won't get drawn into the rough and tumble of politics, that won't have games played with it by any minister of the day, including myself, that it will have a long-term future with a long-term clear set of objectives set in statute, and the ability to really work with and alongside those frontier labs to make sure that their models continue to innovate, continue to lead the world, because we need those models developed in America and the UK under liberal democracies to get there first, but to do so in a way where we can have safety baked in at the outset.
Thank you. My second question is really looking at how the Regulatory Innovation Office, the AI Safety Institute, which is going to come into statutory, which evaluates developing technologies, and ARIA as well, and how they plan to interact. But there's a fourth strand on that, which is all of those are looking at really the development and getting the innovations into deployment. I seriously worry about the lack of interest and focus on post-deployment monitoring and control. We know with the MHRA they have post-market surveillance, but with liability it falls a lot on the providers, and particularly within healthcare. So really, to sum up, my question is, well, how will the RIO, as I call them, the AI Safety Institute and ARIA interact, but also how in any work that you do will you ensure that we monitor post-deployment?
Okay, so those individual organisations won't interact. The Safety Institute needs to have independence to focus entirely on pre-deployment safety issues at its most conceptual way. But you raise a really interesting point on post-deployment. So just to be really clear about that, because I want to reassure people about post-deployment, where the regulators have power and where they don't. We have tasked every regulator with doing an assessment on how non-frontier AI is going to impact the sectors upon which they regulate. And that, of course, includes every regulator across society and the economy. My department is providing funding where need be. If there is a capacity issue within an individual regulator that may not have the digital skills in order to even do the assessment themselves, we'll work with them to make sure that assessment can be done. So pre-deployment testing by the Safety Institute makes sure that all of the issues that I'm sure you can imagine are taken care of before deployment at its most frontier and conceptual level. And let me pay tribute to those organisations for whom have established relationships which are extremely commercially sensitive, for which we respect absolutely fully, and work with them to make sure that they are made aware of any safety issues and then able to take advantage of that before deployment. Once technology is deployed, it becomes the responsibility of every regulator to make sure that the implications of AI in the sectors is accounted for, and that work is ongoing now. But let's just be really clear about the technology we're talking about here. AI is a general purpose technology. It is productivity tools in every office in the land at some point in the near future. It's going to be in radiography departments to get sharper and more precise scans done so we can get to disease earlier. It's going to impact how we as households use and consume energy and electricity and heat ourselves. It's going to make sure the national grid is powered and deployed in a much more efficient and effective way. Because it is a general purpose technology, it is therefore going to impact all areas of society, which is why I don't want us to tumble into a specific piece of AI legislation that tries to name every possible use of it, and then gets us bogged down into sort of over-regulating based on lots of aspects of it. But I am very closely monitoring how the regulatory landscape evolves over time to see how we can give a soft landing to innovations that land in society and our economy. We don't stifle it, but we also have the ability to update it over time so that it keeps up and everybody has the powers they need to shape it.
Point well made. But as you scale up, harms can also scale up. And there is a handover between one type of regulator within a sector which will monitor the development and the ones that monitor its use. And remember that AI is a changing technology. So within the health sector, you will have MHRA who do the medical device regulation, the development. You hand over now into service delivery, which is CQC. And at which point, who is in charge of what? And the monitoring of those things. So it's just a comment I will make to you that sometimes there are some little glitches and gaps in that process when you hand over between regulators. So just have a look at that. And the last question, which is the one you asked me to do.
I was going to suggest that perhaps the Secretary could write to us
this
on
is
that,
one. Do you agree with Lord Valence in his previous role as Chief Scientific Advisor that this committee should leave ARIA alone and let them get on with it?
Well, as a rule of thumb, I always agree with what the ministers in my team have to say. Although, thankfully, I'm not accountable for what they say before they become ministers in my department. But I think the general point that he was making, I think, is a valid one. ARIA is set up for a very specific purpose, and that is to do high-risk investments. And all of us, whether in Parliament or in government, aren't usually comfortable with risk. That is something that I'm very aware of. There's been several occasions when I have, as Secretary of State, sitting with outstanding officials, have had to have conversations about risk and my willingness to shoulder it personally in order to encourage officials to go away and not be hindered by having to look out for any potential handling issues as some of the areas make it out into society. So give you an example. On gov.uk, we launched a chatbot recently, trialled with businesses in beta form. The temptation, this is a very ungovernment thing to do, because we all know what happens when you let loose an early design phase chatbot on society. It comes up with some pretty crazy results in certain circumstances, and there's people out there who are very well trained to know how to get chatbots to say and do pretty crazy things. But for example, the advice that came to me in first iteration was to keep us far away from it as possible. In actual fact, it was very important for me to explain to civil servants why I wanted to be absolutely associated with it, and at launch it personally, be filmed interacting with it. Because, it did speak French at one point, but at some point, the efficiency gains that is going to be able to deliver is going to be extraordinary, because it has access through that gateway to 700,000 websites. It sometimes takes people 7 hours, in some cases days, to get the information from government if you want to set a business up in a specific area and understand the legal implications of hiring staff. We can get that down to 7 minutes through those interactions with that chatbot. So I want to own the risk, so that we can be a government which better reflects the way that technology is developed out there in society. Otherwise, we're never going to get to the point where we can keep up with the people who are innovating at such breakneck pace out there that we should be actually learning from, not actually trying to differentiate ourselves from. And that bit of DCIT, which is there at the cutting edge of taking risk, is ARIA. And I'll always stand by its ability to do things that will even make me uncomfortable.
Thank you, Secretary. We're down to the last 5 minutes. I think that statement that you want to own the risk associated with risky scientific development and innovation is a really interesting one, and a really strong message of a public sector and a government which is willing to take risks in order to deliver. And I think as a committee we will be very keen to scrutinise the consequences of that. But I think recognising that science, innovation and technology is a risky business, is a risky sector, is very important. In the last 5 minutes, I know we want to cover online safety, space, life sciences and infrastructure. So perhaps what I'm just going to do is ask, I think, Josh Emily and I think and Lauren and Adam, just very quickly to, if you wish to make comments in those areas or ask questions. So I'll go to Josh, Emily, and then Emily. Yeah.
Good luck doing this in 30 seconds. Is the set of legislation and government bodies that we currently have adequate to combating at speed the way that algorithms in social media can promote disinformation, as we saw in the riots?
No. Do you want me to answer each individual? Okay.
Yes, and we have an inquiry on this.
Well, I would argue that there's a cultural challenge with algorithms in the private sector. In the public sector, I'm committing to publishing how algorithms are used in the public sector in government departments. The previous government published one of the reports, the algorithmic transparency reports. I'm trying to get us to the point where every government department can publish it regularly. I want to get there as quickly as I can. In the private sector, if you just take a step back and try and do it in 1 minute rather than 30 seconds, my frustration is that we have got to a situation with online activity where it's acceptable to release products into society without having to prove its safety before release. And therefore, algorithms are playing a key role in driving some of the potential harms in that. Now, everything on this table, from the bottles to the pens and stationery, has to be proven that it's safe before it's released. However, with online activity, that's not the case, and the sector has matured with that philosophy. So if you look at my philosophical approach to this in the short time I've been Secretary of State, take the example of intimate image abuse, where I enacted a power 6 or 8 weeks ago, whereby in a short space of time, companies are going to have to prove that the algorithms themselves are preventing those images from going online, and where they do appear online, being removed in a reasonable period of time. That shows, again, that safety is baked in from the outset, and algorithms are there to keep people safe, not exploit vulnerabilities. That increasingly is going to be the direction of travel of me. It can't just be achieved by me just legislating and regulating in Whitehall. It can't just be achieved by me saying I want it. And it cannot be achieved just domestically in the UK alone, acting alone. It's going to require a degree of statecraft to work with our global counterparts, particularly the United States. It's going to require statecraft being applied to companies in a way that we've only really deployed it state to state or secretary of state to secretary of state in the past, in order to explain what we're doing and understand the companies and their cultures, so that we can not stand in the way of innovation and creativity, but also to make sure it's done safely, and expect that the privilege of having access to our society is a privilege, it's not a right, and we expect that responsibility to be built in from the outset. So we are not there yet. I think we are taking steps there. Some of the measures coming out next summer in the implementation of the rules from Ofcom will to be another step forward with age verification and others.
That's sending a clear message, and also a challenge to various actors. Thank you for that, Secretary of State.
I don't think we've really got time but I was just going to say, I'm really glad we're doing an inquiry on this, and hopefully we'll help you figure out some of the answers here.
And if you have any contacts directly with Mr. Elon Musk, can you encourage him to come and give evidence to this committee? We'd very much appreciate that as well. Secretary of State, we have questions on space, on life sciences, on cybersecurity, on infrastructure. I think we could have carried on this discussion much longer, but that's partially a consequence of the openness and the honesty with which you have responded to the questions that we've put to you so far on a wide range of subjects. We really appreciate that. I think it's a really good basis for an ongoing relationship. I think if you can be as open and frank as you have been with us, we will certainly seek to continue to be as constructive and engaging with you. We share very similar ambitions with regard to the importance of science, innovation and technology, the importance of benefits, driving those benefits to citizens and the general public, and the importance of working together constructively across Parliament and indeed across the country. So can I just say, and to the Permanent Secretary as well, and for all the work that you are doing to enable the Secretary of State to answer those questions, answer our questions, and to deliver for the country. Huge thanks from all the committee, and we look forward to inquiring again of you in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll be pithier next time, I promise.
That was good. Really good.
It's very good. It's just, we want to raise the level of debate on science and innovation and technology, and I think you've helped us do that.
Thank you.
Order.